In 2020, Democrats took full control of Washington.
And it will give Democrats control of the Senate.
Joe Biden has been elected.
But Republicans stood up in the states.
There was no blue wave. Democratic down-ballot disasters carried all the way to the state legislatures.
Now, we're the last line of defense against the Democrats' socialist agenda. The ways we're fighting back are bigger than you think. Welcome to episode 4 of It's Bigger Than You Think, a conversation about the politics that most impact our everyday lives. I'm Annie Moore, I'm your host, and today with me is Texas State Representative J.M. Lozano, and we're going to be talking about his time as a state rep and, kind of the things that he's been seeing down at the border recently. And so to kick it off, Representative Lozano, thank you so much for being with us today. And if you just want to go ahead and jump right in, tell us about yourself, your time as a state rep, how long you've been in office, what your district's like, all of that good stuff.
Great, Annie. Well, yes, I'm beginning my 6th term in the legislature. We're actually about midway through session right now. Texas is considered a part-time legislature, so we meet once every 2 years. And I've always wanted to do this since I was probably like 12 years old. I was kind of a wonky kid, but I did play sports, played football, and I played baseball. And I grew up in South Texas, about 90 miles north of the Rio Grande River. The area I grew up in has Border Patrol checkpoints, which have to be within, I believe, 60 miles of the international border. That was a very common thing for us when it comes to issues of illegal immigration, is to see people walking through the farm roads, either to a dairy or walking into town. And that was in the 80s. I was born in 1980, to date myself. That issue of illegal immigration has evolved to something that's far different today, where it used to be people that were coming across just to work from Mexico primarily. Now it's primarily people that are from other than Mexico countries and with gang affiliations. The property is being broke into. People can't live out at the ranch anymore like they used to. They're afraid. There's copper being stolen from walls, from the pipes. And so when I first ran for office, one of my planks was to be able to give property owners immunity from frivolous lawsuits brought by illegal immigrants. What happens is, as there are vehicles fleeing from Border Patrol, they're stuffed with illegal immigrants, and sometimes they crash. And on one occasion, an illegal immigrant died, and a lawyer went to Mexico, got the family to sue the landowner for liability. And It was insane. So my first session actually was real unique because my district at the time was about 85% Democrat. So I ran as a conservative Democrat in the primary. I beat my opponent. And lo and behold, I'm a Democrat filing a bill for border security, essentially. And my whole party at the time was killing my bill. And I said no. I attached it as an amendment in a very sneaky way. And the Republican Party helped me. It became law. Landowners now have immunity from frivolous lawsuits brought by those evading arrest, specifically targeting what was happening in my district. And then I switched parties. I didn't even look back.
Welcome. Glad to have you.
Absolutely. And I always tell people, I went in kind of naive, to be honest, like with a very utopian philosophy about how we're going to be able to represent our district. And I immediately saw that the Democrats were running a playbook out of California. And if you did not adhere to their principles, they were going to go after you. And then when I mean go after you, I mean, after I'd vote for my district pro-life, 100%, the caucus chair from the Democrat Party came to my desk with a manila folder filled with a spreadsheet of phone numbers. And she said, if you don't change your vote, we're going to do a robocall against you tonight. And I looked at her and I said, do it. You don't know my district. Well, Hispanic people are conservative. We are very strong in our Christian faith. And you don't understand. You're out of touch, I told her. So I always tell people I did serve about 14 months as a Democrat, and then I switched. And so I had a Republican primary that I won. I won the runoff. the Democrats loved saying during those races that a Hispanic could not win a Republican primary, prove them wrong. And they've kind of shut up since then.
I would too if I were that wrong.
But the whole thing is I was raised by a dad who's a doctor. He does not like politics, very conservative. And he always just told me that as long as you can look in the mirror and be able to be proud of how you fought for your constituents, like the way he fights for his patients. And that's me in the Republican Party every day.
Yeah, that's super awesome. Welcome to Republican Party. Maybe a couple years late, but glad
yes.
So you were talking about how your district is home to a border checkpoint. What's that been like over the past couple months, here recently?
Yeah. So one thing that I noticed in 2019, I was watching the debates and the Democrat primary presidential debates. Biden said, "You want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come." Okay. Then Biden becomes president, and in his first couple of weeks of office, he stops the construction of the border wall.
Right.
And those two things combined, I knew were going to send a strong message to Mexico as they were watching the election, to everyone in Mexico and El Salvador and Honduras, that if Biden wins, it's going to be amnesty time. I'm not sure if they've stopped doing the Remain in Mexico policy, but essentially what was happening was they were coming across the river and given a court date for an asylum hearing, and then they were let go and told, come back to your court hearing, and they were not coming back. So President Trump ended that. Our school districts, for example, are funded based on the amount of students that are in attendance at about 10 a.m. every morning.
Right.
And the money for that school district comes from the state and primarily from local property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put kids in that school district whose parents are not paying property taxes because their parents live in another country, those funds are spread out thinner among all students. And I'm currently the vice chair of public education,
Mm-hmm.
and I can see that there is a disparity in the quality of funding in border schools and schools that are up north where they don't have large populations of illegal immigrants. And it's not the child's fault, to be honest, but it's a fact of the scarcity of our resources and how right now President Biden appointed Kamala Harris, the border czar, quote unquote.
Right.
She comes from California, which has the highest population of illegal immigrants. They are failing financially as a state, and we cannot let Texas fall into that economic turmoil. President Biden said, you should come. No, we have to have a border. We have to have people that respect our laws and follow the legal pathway into this country, the way my family did. And I tell a lot of people, I was actually born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's a doctor. When he finished in his final year of medical school, the US had a skilled-based immigration program that the US wanted more doctors. My dad applied. He scored very high on his exams, and that enabled him to come to the US, do his residency in medicine. And my dad always told us that this country offers you incredible opportunity, but you have to be proud to be an American, because this is the country that gave us all the opportunities we have. And my dad would always tell us, and I say this from the bottom of my heart, like it was yesterday. And I get teary-eyed because it feels like it was just yesterday, but I'm so proud of my dad for telling me this when I was 5 years old. But he said that if he were a doctor in Mexico, he would be practicing medicine in the day, driving a taxi cab at night, and may be able to support the family. It's socialized medicine in Mexico. And in this country, if you work hard and you're a law-abiding citizen, you can do great things.
So what are your constituents saying about everything that's going on at the border? Are they worried about the stopping of the border wall being built?
Definitely. The area that I grew up in, basically the way the criminals do it is Um, there's the river, which is, an hour or more south of where I grew up. But then north, there's a border checkpoint that's along the highways. So the illegal immigrants are dropped off about a mile south of those checkpoints, and then they're trekked around by a guide through the brush and circumventing the border checkpoint. And eventually they're picked up north of that. And that's where those high-speed chases take place. That's where there's tremendous amount of property destruction. Human trafficking is a tremendous profit for the cartels. Human smugglers, actually, there's legislation that I'm proposing this session, but that would strengthen the penalties for human smugglers. We're told by my constituents is that you can't be out in the county roads at night. You don't know who's in that truck that's coming. Obviously, if you see something that you're not supposed to see, your life's in danger. The state has deployed more DPS troopers to help, but the border wall was key because that border wall was pushing all the human and drug traffickers to other areas along the border that didn't have a border wall.
Right.
And so we do feel like it's increasing now.
Did you see those two little girls that smugglers like dropped over the top of the wall?
Yes, but that's indicative of their lack of, they talk about this is a humanitarian issue. Those human smugglers lack all humanity. They abandon people who are injured, who are elderly, and they end up just dying of dehydration or medical issues in the brush. And they commit sex crimes as well. It really is a crisis.
Yeah, that would be my next question, is if you would consider it a crisis, because
absolutely.
You hear all the conservatives labeling it a crisis. Biden finally called it a crisis, and then the White House walked it back. And we're like, no, that's not our official position. But I mean, you're there, you're watching it happen.
Oh yeah. If that's not a crisis, I don't know what is a crisis. I mean, it's crazy. And I believe that they're also using children now as decoys, because the minute you find a large group of children, Border Patrol has to deploy its assets, and that could leave gaps that are open for drug traffickers.
So you've been a really big advocate, and you were just talking about this bill that is going through the House right now of cracking down on all of the smuggling. I think I saw a stat that was like, over the past year, fentanyl coming over the southern border is up 233%. Have you seen like increases in drug use and drugs coming in over the southern border here recently?
Yes, there have been more seizures being made. It's kind of a different time. Like I mentioned about the 80s, how the type of illegal immigrant was different. It tended to be people that were working just in dairies, in agriculture, seasonal laborers. And if there were illegal drugs, it wasn't black tar heroin or fentanyl, it was weed, or even though it's illegal, it was nothing like fentanyl.
Right. It's not going to you have like a little bit,
Yes, it's insane. They're getting more extreme in the crimes they're committing.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. So for people who might not be familiar with the term catch and release, can you kind of explain what that is and why it's so problematic?
Yeah, so catch and release is basically they're caught by Border Patrol. They're taken before an administrative judge, and pending their asylum hearing, they're released with a piece of paper.
Not on Mexico's side, on our side, right?
On our side, that's correct. They're taken from the Border Patrol station to a detention facility, and then if they have a hearing before an administrative law judge, it might be like 4 weeks out. They're told you're free to go, but you have to come back on this day to see a judge. That's catch and release, and they don't come back. If you think about the amount of resources we deploy to catch them in the first place, and it's all for naught. It's insane.
should never see them again.
Do that.
So what has Texas been doing to help mitigate the crisis that's happening at the border?
Absolutely. So back in 2013, Texas bought DPS, more helicopters with night vision, thermal imaging to assist Border Patrol on the border. We had a border surge of DPS troopers that were essentially on our highways, and Texas still continues that border surge. And it really has stemmed the flow of legal immigration. Of course, President Biden, his rhetoric has made it worse.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have within our power the ability to increase our state police presence along the border, and we have done that.
What do you wish that the federal government would do to kind of help you all down there to kind of mitigate what's going on?
You know, first and foremost, send resources down to those areas to assist Border Patrol. We have military bases that are, in some cases, just an hour away from the border. We see these bases with these vehicles just parked side by side. Let's put them to use. It's not that far away. Our military have the training they have to at least be boots on the ground and serve as more eyes and ears for our Border Patrol. And it's stuff that we purchased with our tax money already. So let's put it to use. Otherwise, it's just there deteriorating.
Might as well you have it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, that we can't allow it to get so out of control that we become California. I mean, we cannot allow that. There's cities in California that file bankruptcy. Cities file bankruptcy because they can't afford their obligations. And that's where we need to act now, immediately. And literally life is on the line as well. There are literally people right now walking through brush country in South Texas, being left behind by a human smuggler who are gonna die. If we had optics on the ground, more boots on the ground, that person may be saved.
How do you think that this affects Texas as a whole and also the United States as an entire nation?
When you compare like our education system on a rating system to other states, you always see states like New Hampshire and Connecticut are ranked in the top 10 and Texas is in the bottom 10. But it's an unfair comparison because in Texas, just like they do, we educate everyone. Unfortunately, we have a very high number of people that don't speak English that aren't reading until they're sixth graders in English. So that's really, when it comes to standardized testing, they're performing at a much lower level than kids from Connecticut or New Hampshire. So they compare us on the same plane, and it's not fair. We can't dumb down our standards because there's kids in that classroom that do read, that do know how to do algebra, and they can potentially move on to pre-cal. But they're being held back because not everyone in that classroom can read the textbook. So there's academic outcomes impacts as well because the curriculum has to be altered. And so there's a variety of issues that manifest themselves from illegal immigration that I worry about. Some of it's generational already. When I played football in high school and our quarterback would be yelling, for the ball, blue 32, blue 32. And we're playing schools from the valley along the river. And they were saying azul, or their whole cadence was in Spanish. The players were communicating in Spanish. When we go to UIL tournaments at other schools, all the kids were talking Spanish in the hallway. And at that time, I didn't think about the academic outcome of those kids. But when you look at the college completion rate, it's much lower for their schools. They'll go to college for 1 year and then they flunk out. And they're stuck with a loan for tuition that can't pay back, that they can't write off through bankruptcy. It messes up their credit, and it's just a horrible snowball that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So there's a lot of social problems that manifest themselves from illegal immigration, which the far left doesn't want to talk about at all.
Yep. Do you think our lack of control at the border right now is keeping good people from wanting to immigrate here?
I do. You have a lot of very educated people who are engineers. Some are in STEM fields, which we have a need for more nurses, more engineers in this country. And when they see the turmoil, and it's like they want to wait until it just calms down. And unless our current president does a complete turnaround, it's never going to calm down. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. I do know someone that was coming to UT in Austin on a student visa, and the amount of homelessness and people with intents living under overpasses. This student was almost in a fight with someone that was high on meth, living in one of these tents, and they lost the enjoyment of being in Austin and going to college. So they're going back to school in Mexico. And this was an engineering student. So it's like these liberal policies that are failing, that's just making things worse. And I really hope that we can win back the White House in 4 years, but also as a state that we continue to enforce our state policy, and that some of our mayors start listening to their voters instead of Democrats from California.
Yeah. Don't California my Texas.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Do you have any last thoughts for our listeners today?
No, yes. Just continue to stay engaged in this process. As you know, it's conservative values that established our country, and it's conservative values that are going to save our country and preserve it for centuries to come.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, Representative, and giving everybody your perspective on, what it's like to serve in office, what you've seen at the border, and everything in between. And thank you to our audience too for tuning in to episode 4 of It's Bigger Than You Think. And we're just having conversations about the politics that most impact our daily lives.